because there are some things that happen to people in America. And as most people may know, particularly your audience, is that we build or make projections about our need for prison space based on third grade reading scores.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like, who knows that?
Right.
Nobody does that.
So your level of literacy in the third grade predicts your outcome.
Welcome to the I Learn, Therefore I Can podcast, an iRise Performance Consulting production where we explore the dynamic world of performance through a learning and development lens with a focus on achieving excellence. I'm your host, Lonnie Gregory, and I'm inspired by those of you that wish to be better at what you've been asked to do.
Welcome to another inspiring episode of I Learn, Therefore I Can, an iRise Performance Consulting production where we explore the stories and insights of extraordinary individuals who have made significant impacts through continuous learning and leadership. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Thomas Stewart as our guest. Dr. Stewart currently serves as the Executive Vice President and Executive Director of the Cause Research Institute at National University. He also co-chairs the Social Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion (SJEDI) Council at National University. With over 30 years of experience in K-12 and post-secondary education, as well as in criminal justice reform, Dr. Stewart is a seasoned executive leader dedicated to innovation and transformation. Throughout his distinguished career, Dr. Stewart has worked tirelessly to provide educational and developmental opportunities for underserved and underrepresented individuals and communities. Before his current role, he served as president of John F. Kennedy University and Patton University. His commitment to education and social justice is evident in his co-founding or leadership of over 20 schools, universities, and nonprofit organizations, including the Black Alliance for Educational Options, BAEO, and the National Black Graduate Student Association, NBGSA. Dr. Stewart's contributions to the field extend to numerous publications on school reform, parent involvement, criminal justice reform, and leading change with grace. A U.S. Army veteran, he holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Government from Harvard University and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of the District of Columbia. With extensive experience in DEI, leadership development, organizational development, executive coaching, team building, facilitation, board development, culture building, change management, and business development, Dr. Stewart is a formidable force in the realm of education and social reform. Join us as we delve into Dr. Stewart's remarkable journey and explore his profound impact on education, social justice, and leadership. Connect with Dr. Stewart on LinkedIn to learn more about his work and contributions to education and social justice.
Friends, you just heard the introduction, a marvelous introduction about my friend, Dr. Thomas Stewart. We had to limit that introduction to the most important facts and figures in history about Tom, but there is so much more to know about this brother. And I can tell you that because he is a friend of mine as well as a colleague in this space. And so I'm really glad that you get a chance to meet him and that he and I get a chance to really talk through some of these things a little deeper. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge you, Tom. Thanks so much for joining me, for joining the platform and for having this conversation. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Lonnie, for having me. It's a wonderful introduction. To some extent, I'm wondering who is that guy you're describing. But we've talked about doing this for some time, so I'm glad this moment has come, and look forward to the discourse.
Yes, the discourse. And you would expect that word coming from the esteemed Dr. Thomas Stewart. So Tom, let's talk about that. Your path from where you grew up, how you grew up, to how you ended up in that town in Boston to achieve the pinnacle, literally the pinnacle in education and accreditation and credentialing. To tell us about that, man, the dude from DC.
Yeah, at some point, you want me to share with you things that people don't know about me or couldn't discern from LinkedIn or resume.
Absolutely.
CV. But I'll tell you, I take a lot of pride in being a behind the scenes, kind of low key person. And I think it has a lot to do with my evolution as a human being. And things that I've learned, particularly about people who look like us,
Mm-hmm.
African American males, males of color. Um, when you are fortunate enough to have Harvard PhD associated with who you are, I think it distracts people from who I truly am. And there's a lot of good fortune that I think played a role in it. But more importantly, I think there's just something about who we are as human beings that everyone has the potential to achieve high levels of development. The only difference between some of us and others are just the support, the encouragement of the good fortune that you experience along the way. I mean, if somebody thinks that you're not worth something, and somebody else thinks that you are, at the end of the day, if they're teachers or other influential people in your lives, then they're gonna be right.
Exactly.
Fortunately, I had a good mix of people who saw something in me, and what I take a lot of pride in, and look forward to sharing some of that with you as part of our conversation, is being able to realize my potential from the standpoint of people who saw something in me. And I remember one mentor in Boston who said to me, believe in me until you have enough faith and courage to believe in yourself. And I was in my
Wow.
second year of grad school. Very dynamic guy by the name of Ron Hill. Met him at a 12-step program. And he was one of the iconic figures in NA, not only in the Boston area, but in the US. And I had, once again, the good fortune of meeting him, having him adopt me as a mentor. And though I'm at Harvard, having an exceptional experience, but at the same time, I'm still an African American male in a city like Boston, though I was in Cambridge, but the overlap between the two cities makes them very fluid. Yeah, it was a stroke of good fortune to
Mm.
meet someone early in my career who just helped me to realize not only that there was potential in me, but how I would use my potential to impact other people is what I'm most proud of.
Wow. That's nice. It is so nice for you to acknowledge what someone has done for you in your life, and how you then parlay into being supportive of others. That's fascinating. I'm just checking one of the settings on this setup. This technology thing is kind of new to me, so forgive me if my eyes stray. But so Tom, in addition to being like just a regular guy, because I know you are, right? Just a regular guy, on top of being an extraordinary guy. What is it? What is that other thing that you would be willing to share about yourself, that I can't discover from any one of your publications, or your profile on LinkedIn, or your curriculum vitae? The
Yeah,
rest of us have resumes, friends. Tom got a curriculum vitae. What can I know that I can't find from one of those documents?
yeah. What inspires me to share a couple of things personally and professionally is our relationship. And there's just some things about who I am that I've learned as a leader to keep separate in an attempt to have a good work-life balance.
Mm,
However, you know, coming from you, a couple things. Um, and one on a personal front that I think kind of epitomizes, what I mentioned earlier about just being of good fortune and having some wonderful people enter my life, is that most people don't know that I was painted by a very gifted artist by the name of Amy Sherrill, who I met here in Baltimore. I reside in Baltimore. Met Amy, almost 15 so years ago. And she was an aspiring but struggling artist who most people now recognize as being one of the most gifted artists, African American woman or not, in America, and painted Michelle Obama.
Wow.
7 years before painting Michelle, Amy, and she and I had known each other for about 3 years or so before then, and she decided that she wanted to do a series of portraits titled "These Ain't No Cotton Picking Negroes," right? And the the theme for her was all the extraordinary people she'd met in Baltimore that the average person would not know their accomplishments. I mean, rarely does anybody know me as Dr. Stewart.
Right.
I rarely use doctor in professionally or personally in any of my interactions with people. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is at the time my son had a rabbit. And she called me and said, I'm doing this series and this is the theme. And I'd like to feature you as one of the artists, or at least one of the people that I like to tell the story about. And she titled the portrait "A Rabbit in a Hat." And she said, as she came to know me, essentially what I did, given the fact that I was in foster care, I grew up in public housing in Washington, D.C., had some brushes with the law, aside from, having a PhD from Harvard. She said, you essentially reached into the hat of life and pulled out a rabbit, right? So most people don't know that story. The other one is, as I mentioned earlier, I've tried to leverage the resources, the influence I have to get forward. And one of the things I've tried to do, and I'm most proud of, and I'll take the try out, I have done, and I'm most proud of,
Right. Good for you.
is support women, women of any color, but specifically women of color, and uplift their careers. And as we get deeper into the conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, as Black men, we know the obstacles that we have to overcome. But I think for women, it's us plus some.
Right.
And, anything that I can do to help people, regardless of how they identify themselves. But I was affiliated with an organization when I became National University, in particular, when I became vice chancellor for what we call social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, a university grounded in the military. And I'm a U.S. Army veteran. So I understand the male and paternalistic nature of that institution. And for me, it's a bit of a microcosm of a lot of organizations in the U.S. and beyond. And so I take great pride in supporting all types of people, once again, but specifically women. And I have helped to mentor, sponsor probably more women than I can count. And, that's not something, once again, I advertise, but I'm truly proud of, and I hope more men would own that challenge and opportunity.
Outstanding. Yes. And so I've known you for several years now. There were 2 years where we met every Sunday, right, to have a conversation about things. And I did not know this about you. So this
But
is
I would add
another
to
layer.
that, just so people understand what you're referencing here. We specifically met initially to talk about a book called "To Be a Man."
To me, man. Yes.
And it was that book that not only helped me to realize that I was already on that path to supporting other people, but more importantly, how significant it was in a way that I had not discerned at the time. That to be a man, is to be, as you and I realize, is to be humble, is to be courageous, It's to be
Mm-hmm.
open-minded, and it's not to be hampered or hamstrung by things that we've done in the past that we could do differently in the future if we choose to. And
Indeed.
so one of the things I walked away from that experience with, because as you all know, as you know, one thing our group talked a lot about was our relationships with women in different capacities. And so professionally, I'm able to do some things that, now in my personal life, I'm focused on one woman at a time. And professionally, I can support and encourage and bless infinite numbers of possibilities as it pertains to women.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, for instance, to give you a little bit of context, a little bit of background, Tom and I have a mutual friend, uh, Robbie Levenberry. He won't mind me saying his name.
His birthday is tomorrow.
His birthday is tomorrow. You will eventually meet Robbie and the rest of the fellas that we were associated with. But Robbie Levenberry got us all together to have a conversation about what it means to be a man, and to use Robert Masters' book, How to Be a Man or To Be a Man, as a study guide for us, which we explored for right around a year. Eventually meeting with Robert Masters to have a conversation about what we learned, and what we were going to apply. So it's really nice to know that the time we spent together exploring ourselves led us to a position where we are now confident in our ability to support others, because we're better in tune with ourselves. So that was a great lesson. Thanks for sharing that. But Tom, I'm sure there are other great lessons that you have learned, particularly that took you on the trajectory of how you serve humanity now. Um, so you did have a particular like specialty, or research area coming out of Harvard. Tell us about what that was, and then how did that morph into a specialty or desire to be in and lead in the diversity, inclusion, and equity space?
No, great question. And essentially, just to kind of break it down for people who may not know what's entailed in a PhD program. Essentially, the PhD, as most people know, is the highest degree that you can earn. PhDs historically have been associated with white males. So one of the things that I appreciated most about pursuing it, earning it, and living it, especially as pertains to folks that look like us, going back to something I said early on, we all have the potential to achieve really high levels of development. So there was nothing unique about me.
Right.
I just received the opportunity. And so most programs are broken down into 2 years of coursework, in which, unlike high school and undergrad, you get to go really deep in one area. Harvard calls the area of social science that I pursued government, but most people know it as political science. And political science has 4 areas: American government, comparative government, international relations, and philosophy. I've focused on American government with a specialization in urban politics. And within
Mm.
the context of urban politics, I believe that prisons are a huge institution at the urban level, particularly big cities.
Hmm.
I resonate well with them because of grandfather, a brother, countless friends, and some other family members who've spent some time in jail or prison.
There,
And
but for the grace of God, go I type of thing.
exactly.
Yes.
My only experiences, have been, working with very closely with prisons and jails as part of what I do professionally. But my dissertation focused on the evolution of poverty, looking at the intersection of the evolution of prisons with poverty. And I believe that within a capitalist context, you can never have full employment. Capitalism thrives off of having some level of unemployment, And that underemployed segment of people, you have to manage them because we all have instincts as humans to generate income.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that income comes from not what I would call criminal activity, but underground activity. So there is just common practices associated with capitalism. And then there's just an underground economy that
Indeed.
people have to participate in order to survive. And so essentially, that was my focus of my research. And it was a way of understanding things about my past and
Mm.
how certain experiences that seem to be common to people that look like me that I can help make sense of. Um, I've discovered after pursuing what most would consider an academic track where I would become a professor that I had more of an entrepreneurial bent than I realized. And I subsequently have been involved in starting schools and nonprofits and doing other things to just impact people, specifically, as I mentioned earlier, in the area of human development. I've continued to work very closely with prisons. And, one of my recent experiences was president of a university, Patton University, based in Oakland, California, that had the only prison higher education program in
Mm.
California from roughly 2015 to about a year ago, given the recent reinstatement of Pell Grants in the state of California. So I was in and out of San Quentin as part of an associate's degree program that
Wow.
we've offered. And some of the most, and I'll just say this, some of the most intelligent people I've met have been incarcerated.
How about that?
And it's a shame that we continue to warehouse untapped talent the way, once again, the capitalism requires.
How about that? So, just if I can just ask you, just say a little bit more about the talent, the smart people that you're meeting who happen to be incarcerated. What is your hope for them? How do you see them coming out? Uh,
Yeah,
when it's over.
yeah. I mean, and we'll bring this back to DEI and how that set of experiences informs what I believe is the answer from the standpoint of equity, right? Because there are some things that happen to people in America, and as most people may know, particularly your audience, is that we build or make projections about our need for prison space based on third grade reading scores.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Like, who knows that?
right. So, so,
Nobody does
so,
that.
so your level of literacy in the third grade predicts your outcomes for the most part. I had the good fortune, and not because of the respondents, but once again to just be in a position to do something on behalf of the government of Washington D.C. Probably back in, call it 2011, 2012. They were looking for researchers to help them understand the impact of investments that they were making in what they were calling members that individuals who were illiterate in the District of Columbia.
Hmm.
The DC government earmarked $50 million per year to support people who were illiterate, adults who were illiterate.
Hmm.
Um, to the best of their estimation, only 5%, 10% of those resources, or $5 million, was actually having the desired impact. What they wanted, and I was selected to do this engagement, is to meet with various members who are eligible, various citizens who are eligible for these resources who had not taken advantage of them. And so we did individual interviews and focus groups with young people, older people, single mothers,
Hmm.
single fathers, grandparents who had raised young people in the city, formerly incarcerated individuals, uh, and individuals had gone on record saying they could not read beyond a sixth grade level. And what we wanted to know is, one is, how did they negotiate their personal and professional lives in a society that required a certain level of literacy?
Indeed.
And it will blow you away, the things that they would say. But one comment that was made in the focus group I'd never forget. It was a woman who basically said that she was probably in her late 20s, early 30s, that she said, we're like blind people. When you teach us something once, we have to commit it to memory. And pushed her a little bit more to kind of explain it. And she said, when you're blind and somebody teaches you how to go from point A to B without sight, you memorize getting from A to B as if your life counted on it. And you memorize it. She said, so when somebody teaches us how to take a bus from home to work, or the subway from home to work, from visiting people, we have to commit that to memory because we can't read the signs. Most of them rely on somebody in their lives to be their guide. Another person told me, who worked in a law firm in the mailroom, that every day he would go into the common space to get coffee. He'd get there early and he would mingle around for half an hour, 45 minutes. And all he's doing is hearing people's conversations about the news of the day.
Gotcha.
He said he would take a newspaper, and they typically had stack of Washington Post, put it under his arm. He'd go down into the mail room. The newspaper was to convey that anything that he said, he read in the newspaper. But actually everything that he would share as part of his conversations with his coworkers is what he heard.
Wow.
In the common space. So I've had just a lot of wonderful experiences from, that population to incarcerated populations. My resume will reflect that I started, co-founded and was the head of one of the first urban boarding schools. The things that I've learned from young people who came to us in the sixth grade from really challenging parts of Washington, D.C. Subsequently, I've started charters in like 7 other cities. And that always required being at the grassroots level to understand what the community needed, how the community was engaging education. Because as you know, based on our conversations, you come up in a low income area, not just being Black or of color. I've met this in South Boston with some of my white friends, in other places like Baltimore that has a sizable population of low income white people. DC doesn't have low income white people, for the record. There are other cities that have them, and I've been able to meet with them. And they have the same challenges that a lot of poor Black folks, a lot of poor Hispanics or Latino communities have. And at some point, I love us to come back to just the intersectionality of what it means to be a human being. Because when we talk about diversity, we often talk about it as if we have to claim one form of identity. I'm a Black person, or I'm a male, or I'm poor, or I have a disability. When the reality is that we're often a combination of those things.
We are
and
indeed.
We share that overlap with other people, may not necessarily be a Black male, but they have other common lived experiences that overlap with mine. And the military helped me to unlock that one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was in the military too. In fact, when you're in the military, when you do serve, when you do have a sense of mission, not just purpose, but the absolute mission to achieve something in support of, some strategic objective, then the intersectionalities are directly linked to your ability to support that mission and nothing else, right? Um, that's not always the case, though, Tom, isn't it? Which, I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something led you into more of a focus around the principles and the ideas of DEIA, such that you're asked to stand up these types of programs and be the advocate and the sponsor for them, spokesperson for them, and to be responsible and accountable for the outcomes associated with these types of programs. Um, and you've done those things.
Yep.
Share what it's like, when you start down the path to create programming in support of these grand ideas, and have you experienced, as many are currently experiencing, a backlash on these efforts?
Yeah,
What is your experience with respect to that?
yeah. I've assumed several leadership roles over, call it, the last 20 years. And I think implicit in any true leader's role and responsibility is creating a space that everyone can thrive, right? And that's from an employee standpoint. And I also believe that regardless of the product or service that you offer, you have to know your customer, and you have to produce a product or service that speaks to the need of your customer base. And if you want to expand your customer base, you need to expand the types of people who will appreciate your products and services. And I think the thing that was challenging in leadership roles, aside from the one that I recently held, that specifically allowed me to focus on what we call SJEDI, social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that my responsibilities were so broad,
Mm-hmm.
that I had people reported up to me that were responsible, say, for DEI, or however it was defined in an organization. And I didn't have enough bandwidth to make sure that they did it in a way that was consistent with the way I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly I did my best. But when I was extended an offer as I stepped out of my last presidency to move into a vice chancellor's role, as part of the National University System, which had 4 universities, and I was president of one of them. We merged John F. Kennedy University into our flagship university, National University. The board, the chancellor, appreciated who I was, and extended me an offer to set up the inaugural office of SJEDI, which would have been in roughly 2018.
Yeah.
And for us, though it was on the heels of the George Floyd incident, it was more gender that was a challenge for us. And given everything I mentioned about my history of appreciating opportunities to impact women, they were speaking my love language,
Gotcha.
that they wanted me to step into a role that would enhance the possibilities for women. And not only just our employees, but about 65% of our students were women, and mostly women of color. So now I am being elevated to a role where I can specialize and focus in a really intense way in one thing, and not have to worry about the budget, not have to
Gotcha.
worry about enrollment, not have to worry about legal issues, not have to manage a board of trustees, not have to travel to China a couple times a year, in other parts of the country to do recruitment. And I thought, if it's only for a couple of years or so, and I truly believe we live in an era where leadership roles are only 3 to 5 years in terms of maximum shelf life, depending on the industry that you're in and the intensity of the role, because burnout is real.
Right. Yeah.
For example, being a president, I'm on 24/7. I'm on call. I've kept my phone on the ringer, not on vibrate. every night because security could call me for something. And
Yeah.
I could potentially delegate that to someone else who reported to me. It's always going to come to me first.
Yeah, and I'm smiling, friends, because I've witnessed that.
Yeah, yeah,
I've witnessed this at very casual events, cookouts or something like that, and the phone will buzz, and
yeah.
Tom
And
excuses himself.
it's a commitment I signed up for. It's a commitment I love because I'm protecting my constituents.
Gotcha.
And so that's how I landed in DEI. There are pros and cons to it, but there's a national organization that leads this work in higher education called the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed. The acronym is NADAHE. NADAHE is African American founded and for the most part operated. And they have a professional component, what they call the Institute for Professional Practice.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Institute espouses that if you raise your hand in any organization and say that you want to take on the role of DEI as a director, as executive director,
Mm-hmm.
however you inherit the title, the commitment you're making is no different than being a doctor, a lawyer, or pursuing some other career path. It's not token. And for 6 months, you learn all the things that go into doing this work highly effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is, regardless of how you identify yourself, you're stepping into the role that will advocate and champion the way everyone in your organization identifies themselves. And if you're not willing to embrace that,
Right.
then you're not serious about being a professional in this space. And so, I thoroughly believe in that approach. We will not be deterred, given the ebbs and flows.
Ebbs and flows. So let me ask you something. Do you see the current onslaught, and I'm going to call it that. Many have called it other things like direct attack on DEI. Do you see this current attack on DEI as an ebb or a flow in some cycle?
Yeah, no, I mean, we live in arguably the most diverse society in human history. It comes with challenges and opportunities. The challenge is that everybody agrees. I understand some people feel threatened. I can't judge them for what they choose to do, but I can oppose them and express a different view.
Mm-hmm.
But I get, for example, some poor white males may feel like they were overlooked separately than being a white male supremacist, right? One aspires to have a world that's dominated by white males. The other just wants the same type of support that others, and to confuse the two means to lose the opportunity to talk about things like intersectionality.
Right.
Once again, I want the same for that white male who desires to have access to post-secondary, wants it in an affordable way, and hopes that the quality of his investment was worth the time and money.
Right.
I mean, everybody wants that. Now, what I need to help that person understand is that's not in odds with anybody else. But a white supremacist, that's a whole nother conversation, right?
Gotcha.
From a religious standpoint, to be a member of a religious group or have an orientation that's much like a white supremacist, in which it's either your way or nobody's way, is different than somebody who has an interpretation of the Bible that was imposed on them. And once you challenge them to revisit that interpretation from their personal perspective and not think about it as something that was imposed on them, and they're open to that conversation, I got some hope there.
Gotcha.
So I believe, there'll be ebbs and flows, but I think at the end of the day, there's enough Americans who appreciate, given its strengths and limitations, democracy and capitalism as a better way of life than an autocratic, fascist, or some other form of opportunity that is being proposed.
Okay. We are approaching the bridge to cross. Before we move on, so you did mention that the program that you are directly responsible for,
SJI, Social Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
Right. One of the arguments that I've heard from people who are tiring of the DEI initiative in space is the various combinations of letters that we have strung together to indicate, some program or some approach or some philosophy or some model. As I hear you, espouse these things, I wonder, is it a case of a rose by any other name smells as sweet? Does it matter the order of the letters or how we change the title that we're still talking about, diversity, equity, inclusion, or does it matter that we have programs that are specifically laid out to communicate a particular thing as opposed to something else?
No, I think we should have some flexibility with the terms a leader or an organization adopts, whether it's a mom and pop organization with a handful of employees or Fortune 500 company with thousands of employees. I think as long as the approach, and I think we live in a world where the terms have a lot of value. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, given those three terms, diversity is the one that's under the most assault because it's typically narrowly defined as Black or women. I could, if we had a longer conversation, show you 26 to 36 different forms of identity that I think are implicit in the term diversity. And it's an intersectionality of two or more of them that come into play within any organization. So I get that one. You grapple with it, within a unique organizational context. Equity can't be denied from the standpoint that we need to constantly, daily, weekly, revisit whether we're just being equitable, not in terms of outcome, but the process that we employ in everything that we do within an organization. So, for example, you're hiring a new employee. Certainly you own the company. You got the latitude to hire a family member or friend. If you want to live with that, that's cool. But on the other hand, if you want the best talent possible and you're open to doing it in a very traditional way in which you post your position, and then you allow various candidates to apply, and you have a very objective process that allows the best candidates to surface into what we might call a pool of finalists, and you select from that small pool the person who's the best fit for advancing your organization. That's the way to do it. Now, if you want to take shortcuts, You want to live with the consequences of just selecting somebody mediocre. Um, that's your right. But the process of being equitable, and I'm just using a hiring example, and we can use other examples of ways you can be equitable. Can't deny that. And then just inclusion is essentially making sure you got the right people involved in making a decision.
Yeah.
Period. Right?
I have a thought about inclusion. I think we got it all wrong, all of us. I'm certainly overhearing that diversity is being asked to the dance and inclusion is having music to dance to, or whatever it is we used to say.
Yeah.
I'm certainly tired of those things. It cheapens what it really means. When when I'm in a conversation about inclusion, I always ask this question: included in what? And from a products and services perspective, my experience has informed me that people want to be included in that product and in that service that is ultimately being transacted to some constituent somewhere. Such that if I'm an engineer working on the Formula 409 product, which took 408 attempts to get it right, if I'm an engineer, I'd like to know that, one of the chemical additives that ended up in the final formula is one that I thought of and created, and it ended up in the bottle. I am not necessarily included if I show up to all the product meetings and there's nothing about that product or service that ends up in the customer's hands that I, for all intent and purposes, had nothing to do with. Because I've heard these stories related to me as such. What I'm curious about, Tom, is there anything that, like, practitioners like yourself in this instance, or folks like me, or folks that have historically been involved in the DEI conversation and support thereof, is there anything that we have not done well as a reason for some of this backlash that we're experiencing? Or we can phrase it in a positive: what can we do better to get ourselves out of this current web or flow?
Yeah, and I know things are winding down for us, and perhaps there's a part two to this conversation that I'm very open to. Um, and I'll just go back to some things I just said a few minutes ago, and I would preface it by saying that this is not a really simple conversation, depending on various factors like your tax status, right? Are you a public entity? And are we talking to leaders in the public space?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a nonprofit? Is it an LLC? Right? Because in each of those sectors, there comes responsibilities and liabilities associated with you do and you don't do. And so I think some of these terms come into play more in the public space, more so than the nonprofit and kind of the private sector. And just want to acknowledge that, right? Mm-hmm. So that, we're not suggesting something that's ubiquitous in a way that's just unrealistic. I speak for the most part from a nonprofit in a public space, more so than private. But I do believe that one thing all those sectors share in common is a desire to be successful, mm-hmm. Regardless of what is the perceived return on investment. And I think that requires offering your customer something that gives your organization more sustainability. And if you choose to create a leadership body within your organization, however they're recruited and hired, that doesn't understand the customer, means that you're going to offer an inferior product or service and therefore you're going to hinder the return on your investment, and your sustainability is questionable.
Yeah, that's the theory. I offered a similar explanation to a gentleman out in Silicon Valley several years ago, trying to sell him a DEI program, literally. And he looked at me, he says, Lonnie, given the same argument, he looked at me and said, Lonnie, why do I need to do that? We're making money hand over foot. Right. So they're profitable, they're engaged, they got stockholders, they're all, similarly situated. He wanted to know why should he do this, and I politely shared with him, well, it's not about the money you're making today, it's about the money you could be making in the future. Right. So he bought that idea, allowed us to come in and do our thing. Maybe he was impressed the fact that I could counter his argument. Don't know how much better they are performing now. This was 10 years ago, right? So don't know how much better they're performing now. But they're accustomed to that argument, Tom. They've all heard that argument, but they can make different types of decisions because the argument doesn't show up on their balance sheets.
Right. And once again, you're using a private sector example, which is fundamentally different than the public sector and the nonprofit sector. And I would suggest tailoring the argument in a more specific way. But at the end of the day, if a leader or an organization chooses not to embrace DEI, then they got to live with the consequences of that, right? And so that's the way I see it. But
so
I'm being pinged now because I told some folks I'd be done at 8:50.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we could definitely go on, man. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, we can come back to part two. Actually, I'd like you and some other folks to share a platform, and have this conversation. Yeah. Your ability to discern what is opportunistic between the various domains that practitioners support with respect to DEI is important, and it should be contrasted by the opposite, right? So we could hear the people who are dedicated to this space share their experiences from different perspectives, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Yeah. But before I let you go, man, just one last question before you go. Is there something that you'd like to share with the audience that we just didn't get around to? Or if you could ask of yourself a question and answer your own question about this topic, about this space, what would it be?
I mean, I think the one I still intrigued about, the one aspect of DEI, SJEDI as we call it, that I think we will advance going forward, because these are dynamic terms, right? They're not stagnant. As we continue to evolve as a global society, we're going to have to figure out the best ways to refine these terms, maybe change them, expand them. But I believe it's the intersectionality, as I mentioned earlier, in which is a combination of ways that we see ourselves as human beings. And I think the most intuitive, insightful people that I meet understand that they are multi-dimensional. Some people that I struggle with when I talk to them, or I witness from a distance, who struggle with embracing some of this terminology, see themselves as, singular, and maybe just two facets of who they are. And then I think we move in and out of being different types of people as we grow and we mature. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think the folks that will really lead the conversation in the future will embrace that in a way that it will resonate with folks. And
Gotcha.
and we can continue to keep it alive. I don't think it dies. I mean, because of some efforts with the governor of Florida or a handful of people in Texas or Missouri, that's the beauty of having 50 states. It's like 50 little countries, right? And each, has its own culture,
Right.
and a way of grappling with, whatever the issue of the day is.
Outstanding. So you're hopeful. You're optimistic.
I'm very optimistic.
Good for you. As am I.
Yeah.
Because I am, and because I trust you and believe in you.
Yeah.
Friends, my friend, my man, Dr. Tom Stewart. Tom, will you come back and talk to us again and get you with some other folks? We can have a conversation.
Lonnie, I look forward to it. Thank you for having me,
sir.
brother.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks so much. Thank you. That concludes this episode of I Learn, Therefore I Can, an iRise Consulting Performance podcast. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling better about being better at what I was asked to do. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. And thanks for learning, because learning matters and performance counts. Be well.